Hello and welcome to another episode of the GCSUNScast, the longest running Gold Coast Suns show on the interwebs. I'm your host Shane, and thanks to our Patreon sponsors Dale Snelling, Paul Vosti, Robbie Fiorini, Brody Burgess, Kate Kelland, Tom Kim and Tim. Thanks so much for your support. You keep the lights on and the show running every single week. And welcoming to the rotating guest chair this week, Jason Churchill, the famous Suns with a Jacket fan, and you can hear his thoughts every week on ABC Radio. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Good evening, Shane. Thank you so much for having me, buddy, and good to see the Suns get a win on the weekend.
Yeah, it's good. The fourth win for the year, and it was a solid win as well. Every time the Suns, every time Hawthorn seemed to get a goal or a couple of goals in a row, the Suns were able to peg it back and get a couple in a row on their own. With the exception of that first quarter, I think the Suns' defensive unit held up pretty solidly and didn't let Hawthorn get more than 2 goals in a row at any other point of that game. So
yes,
it's really encouraging, because that's really a good sign of a defensive unit to be able to stop that flow of goals. And the Suns were able to hit back with their own, which is just as encouraging. So,
100%.
Go on.
Yeah, 100%. Totally agree, Shane. It's the consecutive goals is what really makes the difference between the average teams and the good teams. You can see how they can shut down defensively, slow the game down a bit, and stop teams getting on a roll. And the Suns have been able to do that for the majority of the season, and it was great to see it for 4 quarters against Hawthorn, albeit against a depleted Hawthorn. They were missing Jager O'Meara and absolutely in a rebuild phase. But yeah, it's good learnings, and yeah, they're still a very, very young Suns team, and I think the young Suns will be spoken of for this season and this season alone, because from 2022, I think the expectations are going to be very different, and there'll be no more excuses and, they're still young, they're still learning. I think they've had enough time now over the last couple of seasons under Stuart Dew and throughout this season as well, that this looks like a pretty good launching pad. And 2022, I think it's seriously finals. I can see the Suns making finals next year, all things being equal at this point in time, and you can see a lot of signs, and the Hawthorn game showed some of those signs once again.
Yeah, and we'll touch in on more about the Hawthorn game in just a moment. Coming up on the show as well, we're also going to talk about the Gold Coast Suns and how we think they've gone for the mid-season review. It's been 11 games, a few games that we expected to lose, a few games that we expected to win and didn't. But overall, we'll get into our thoughts on that later in the show. And then to finish up on tonight's show as well, we're going to talk about the mid-season draft, which happens this time tomorrow night. The Suns have 2 selections in that draft, and we are expecting at least a new ruckman to come into the side to give the Suns a hand in that area of the ground. So let's kick off tonight's show with the Hawthorn game. Gold Coast 17 goals 11, 113 defeated Hawthorn 11 goals 10, 76. A 37-point win for the Suns, which was a very comprehensive win. King and Rankin both finished the game with 4 goals each, showing just how dangerous the Suns are in attack with our young, flashy forwards. And Alex Sexton bobbed up with 3 himself. So lots of goal kickers there, and it was the biggest score the Suns had under Stuart Dew since he came into to coach the side, wasn't it, Jason?
It was indeed their highest score in 4 years, in fact. So, Stuart Dew's, I think what's his 3rd season in charge, and 2017, I think it was, where they managed about 120 in a game. So. Encouraging signs. We love to see teams kick a score, but also to hold Hawthorn to just 11 goals was fantastic.
Yeah. So Stuart Dew's 4th season in charge, and it was good to see the boys get a win and score, because that's really what we've been wanting as Suns fans. I don't know about you, Jason, but going to the Metricon home games, I'm sitting there. It crosses my mind at least once a game. are we going to get the 60 points so we can get that free Big Mac from McDonald's? And of all the times it's happened this season, it wasn't at Metricon. It was a home game in Sydney, of all places. And we'll get on to that later, but it's just good to see the Suns finally kick a winning score in a game, you know?
Yeah. My son and I enjoyed a Big Mac at lunchtime on Sunday. So thank you very much, Isaac Rankin, Ben King, Alex Sexton, and the hard-working midfield, and a great team defensive effort to get them over 60 points, which was they were 68 at half-time. So we were celebrating at half-time for a Big Mac. So it was fantastic.
So Miller had 37 disposals, 10 contested, 10 score involvements, and a goal. So he continues his terrific run of form and really starts to push himself in the mind of all Australian selectors. Do you think we might see Tuke Miller make it that far?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he for the first time since Gary Ablett, it's 5 consecutive games in a row. He missed one through suspension, unfortunately, because he'd be up there in the Brownlow as well. But 5 games in a row, he's had 30-plus disposals. I know it's not all about disposals. We see some cheap disposals being won by some players, but Tuke is in and under and getting them in the midfield and having some really good positional play and really good run once he leaves the contest. So he's earning each and every one of those disposals, and 37 on the weekend and a 30-plus 5 games in a row, which has got him undoubtedly right now, halfway point of the season. He would be in the squad of 40, no doubt whatsoever, in my mind.
Yeah, he's doing really well, and I think I saw something the other day saying that he was 4th in the leader count for the coaches' votes, and that's a good indication of where a player could poll in the Brownlow. And I don't think there's too many Suns players taking points off him. Great performance by Tuke Miller. One of the other standouts for the game was Brandon Ellis, 28 disposals and a goal. But I was most impressed with the way that he worked from the back line to set up the score for the Suns in attack. There was one play in particular, I think it was in the second quarter, where Hawthorn were challenging again, and they'd really tightened up on the corridor, but Brandon Ellis, with the ball at half-back, was able to bite off a kick into the middle of the ground and really set the Suns up for an attack going forward, and it resulted in a goal. It was just good to see that Brandon Ellis, a senior head at the Suns, is getting involved and setting the tone early for these young kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, Tuke is in career best form at the moment, and he's one of the more experienced, even though relatively young himself. Dave Swallow's been in terrific form, also one of the more experienced players. But this is why they brought Brandon Ellis to the club. He's experienced, he's been there, he's won premierships, he's seen an elite unit go about it, and he knows what is required. And you do see him, I've seen him remonstrate a little bit in, not over the top, just, come on guys, we should have done this when a goal has been scored. I've been watching him very closely this year. He's been super consistent. He brings great energy to the group. He brings obviously great knowledge as well. When they got him, I didn't rate him as highly as what I do now. I thought he was a good player at Richmond, but I would say good and good only. I now consider him a very good player. He's gone to the next level since he's been at the Gold Coast, and a fantastic pickup by the Suns to get him up here and have him on. I think he's on a 5-year contract when they signed him a couple of years ago, and his experience, we hear it all the time. You can't put an old head on young shoulders, and he's not that old, but he's a lot more experienced. He's got 100-odd games more experience than the Suns' average player, and you can see that. You can see that extra 5 seasons of footy, and just knowing when to go, knowing when to bite off the corridor, knowing when to swing back and hook back from the wing into defence and help out the defensive unit if they are getting the ball pumped into the defensive side of it. So his leadership on the field and positional play and the education that he's providing some of these younger players, you see the likes of Will Powell, Jack Bowes, Jai Farah, these guys are coming along brilliantly this season. And I know that the likes of Dave Swallow, Tuke, and as we're talking about now, Brandon Ellis have really got a lot of credit to take for that, because you can see the leadership on the field, and it's really paying off in games.
Yeah, and just on that, I mean, David Swallow, I was one of the first people to have a crack with him. I'm not even sure if you were on the same show that I was early in the year. I had a crack at David Swallow. I thought he could be doing more, and he certainly stepped up. He had 25 disposals, 7 clearances, 7 tackles, leading by example for the Suns, moved into the midfield again, and he's really having an impact. So it was those 3 mature bodies for the Suns, Miller, Ellis and Swallow, that I think really set the tone for the game. And then what we'll discuss next is the talent, the cream of the crop that sort of filtered through that midfield. And we saw like King and Rankin down forward having a big impact. We saw Lukosius off half-back and Flanders running through the midfield. These young kids all getting involved, having a big impact and setting up for a really good win. So what were some of the standouts for some of these other players that really took your attention?
Jack Lukosius, he was just absolutely superb. He took 14 marks. He had, out of his 27 disposals, he had 23 kicks, and his disposal efficiency was about 78% or thereabouts. And I've enjoyed watching him, and a little bit, if you mentioned Dave Swallow, and he was played at half forward a little bit over the last period of time, probably the last 10 or 15 games, and trying to run the likes of Noah Anderson through the middle and what have you. So Dave, he always gives 110%, and I just think that he was missing some of the connection points, and he wasn't getting as much of the ball as what I would like, and I'm sure what all Suns fans would like. Would love to see Dave Swallow getting a lot of the ball, but we need to get it in the hands of the elite kickers, and Jack Lukosius is out and out elite. He'd be the top 3, I reckon, in the AFL right now. Dave Swallow is a very good kick. But he's not Jack Lukosius. He bites off the corridor. He bombed a drop punt off 3 steps from 55 for a goal on the weekend.
And he set that play up as well, off half-back. As you were saying, it was a terrific piece of work by Lukosius to follow up on the efforts as well. And he gets the reward, which is what you, as a coach yourself, you'd want to be drilling that sort of play into the kids, that if you follow up on your hard work, you get the opportunity to get rewarded for it. Definitely.
I mean, we're talking about the Hawthorn game. I'm always bigger picture, and you can see why they've recruited the Isaac Rankins and the Ben Kings, the Noah Andersons. Obviously, Matt Rowell was a no-brainer. Jack Lukosius, Will Powell, these guys. They're all 10-year players. This is it. This is the exciting thing for this group. They're all similar ages. They're between the age of 19 and 22, 23 now, if you throw the likes of Jack Bowes into that. They are all going to be elite. And if you've got 5 or 6 elite players in your best 18 and they remain fit, you play finals every year. So you can actually have role players, as we've seen in Richmond, for example. You've got the likes of David Asprey and even Brandon Ellis to a certain extent. He wasn't a massive ball winner, but he was a little bit of polish on the outside, and he might only have 15 possessions and kick 2 goals, but he did his bit for Richmond. So you can see these role players. They don't have to always get the 25, 30 possessions, as we know. They're so important, and the elite skill that the Isaac Rankins and obviously Jack Lukosius has got is so rare. For a 21-year-old to be in the top 3 kicks in the game, they're normally hitting their prime at 25, 26. He is that good. And I've been a little frustrated with him at times during the year where I've gone that whether it's Jack or whether it's been the team structure or just one of those nights, when he only gets 10, 12, 14 possessions, it's so frustrating because the ball needs to be in his hands. He needs to get 20 possessions. He needs to have 15 kicks as a minimum every single week, because those 15 kicks, 14 of them are going to hit someone on the chest, normally 50 metres away, because 737 metres gained. He's had games where he's been around the 700-800 mark, and he's playing off halfback, off the wing, and even at times he's played forward, and I think that's where he's had the lower possession games. He can't be too far forward. He needs to be delivering into the forward 50. He doesn't need to be in the forward 50 because he can kick them from 55, 60. So half-back and wing and maybe a half-forward that comes up the ground is going to be his sort of a role, and he is approaching elite, certainly just from a skills and kicking point of view. But if he continues to get 20 possessions plus consistently, he'll be spoken about possibly next year as All-Australian as well. So we're throwing it out there. It's a big call, but I really like what I see with Jack Lukosius. Let's just offer him another 3 or 5 year contract and lock him in to be at the Suns long term, because it's a bright future for him and for the Suns.
Yeah, hopefully we can lock in some of this young talent. One player that hasn't been locked in yet that we're hoping will sign at some stage this year, Sam Flanders, moved into the midfield this game, had a ferocious attack on the footy and got 5 clearances, 19 disposals, 5 tackles and 27 pressure acts. I've been talking up Flanders for the last couple of weeks at the little things he does off the ball, the pressure acts. He's always been leading the Suns as far as pressure acts go when he does play. So he's naturally out there hunting the ball and putting pressure on the opposition. So to see Flanders get reward for effort when he gets moved into the midfield really shows that he can play at this level, and not just play but have an impact. And it was thanks to Flanders in the midfield which really helped the Suns get the ascendancy later in the game when it looked like they might be tiring.
Definitely, yeah. The jury's been out with for me with Sam Flanders, and I thought that he'd be one of the first maybe to be considered to miss out when Matt Rowell was to come back at some point, because we've got Rowell, obviously, Jack Bowes, Sam Day, all potentially back in the next couple of weeks. Who misses out? I mean, this is the issue, that which is a good issue to have. But Sam Flanders was probably one of those 3 or 4 players that would be considered, in my eyes, up until the last 2 or 3 weeks. Because I haven't really watched him that closely, but he's forced me to watch him closely the last 2 or 3 weeks. He has been superb and surprised me. I didn't realise he was that good. He was sort of touted as a sort of a tough, hard, nuggety sort of half-forward, good pressure player, not too dissimilar to a Nick Holman type, to a Ben Ainsworth type. However, he's gone through the midfield and more than held his own. He has been very, very good, and learning his craft the last few weeks, because he is still very, very inexperienced. Off the top of my head, maybe he's had 15, 20 games of footy. Correct me if I'm wrong, Shane. You may know off the top of your head, but he hasn't played that much. He's been in and out of the team a bit last year. But I'd love to see him stay at the Suns as well. And I think that the squad they've got now, they don't need to tinker with too much. I think they've got the building blocks there. Just a little bit more backup for the injuries around the rucks, and maybe a tall key defender. And maybe another forward. But I'll tell you what, there's an embarrassment of riches right now. It's not quite getting the result that we would like. I'd like to think this time next year, if we had the same 11 games, would be 7-4, not 4-7.
Yeah, and we'll touch more on that in just a moment. Sam Flanders has 13 career games to his name, so still a lot more to improve on.
It took him 10 games for the penny to drop, because his 11th, 12th and 13th game, I think, have been his best, and his pressure has been awesome. Normally you relate the pressure to the Nick Holmans, Tuke Miller and Dave Swallow, that they seem to be the barometer. But Sam Flanders looks like he's following in their footsteps. So he'd be crazy to go anywhere, in all fairness, because he's got some very good mentors around him, and he's going to be part of an elite unit that is going to play a lot of finals footy throughout the 2020s, in all fairness. They've got a great decade ahead of them.
Yeah, and the only other player I had here to mention was Nick Holman. He just impressed, as he always does. He hit the scoreboard early and really set the tone with his attack on the footy. And he had a rough week. After the show last week, we had a bit of a marathon trial at the tribunal with Nick Holman contesting that tackle charge from the other week. Talking to those at AFL House, the lawyers for the AFL were arguing that it was two motions, that tackle, and Holman went out of his way to drive the player into the ground. So, as ridiculous as that seems, apparently they were making a very, very
firm argument for it, you mean?
Yeah, it was.
Which
that's why it took ridiculously long for them to come down with the decision, and they got the right decision. But apparently it wasn't all clear cut as we thought. There was a bit of grey involved in there, and in the end, the right conclusion came out because Holman was in the air during the tackle. He couldn't have done much more. And,
it was the perfect tackle. It was honestly the perfect tackle because if he didn't, there was one motion. What they might have argued, the fact that he actually dropped his, bent his knees and went to his knees and then fell to the side to avoid going into Mitch Duncan's back. That's what he specifically did. That's not a second motion. That is all part of the one motion. It was all, and I guarantee you, if you asked Mitch Duncan, he would have said, I was too slow. I got run down by someone who's quicker than me, and it was a perfect tackle. That's the person that you need to talk to. It was a football action. Nothing wrong with it. Nothing to see here. Move on. That was what I thought initially. I was gobsmacked that he actually got reported in the first place. I think 90% of us were. But as you make, there's always a counter argument, Shane, and anything can happen in a court of law.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, let's finish off this game by talking about a couple of things that we weren't too happy with. And the most obvious thing, I think, was the broadcast. The Channel 7 broadcast was probably the worst broadcast footage of game of football I've ever seen. Terrible camera work. The audio levels were off. The interface, where the scorecard and everything flashed up on the screen, that looks so ugly. Maybe I'm just used to watching Fox games of AFL, but this Channel 7 broadcast they put out was very, very average.
It was VFL standard. Let's be honest. It was VFL standard. I'll give them a mulligan. I'll give the AFL and the broadcasters a mulligan for it because this game was only decided to be at the SCG midweek. So they only had a limited preparation and I dare say limited staff with the COVID outbreak and the game obviously being well and truly planned to be played up in Darwin. So we'll give them a mulligan for that, considering 3 or 4 days. I don't think they would have had all the usual broadcast facilities and all the cameras that they would have had normally. I'd imagine that would be my guesstimate.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the case, but it was still very tough to watch.
It was.
One of the on-field issues that I wasn't too happy about with the Suns, and this is a pet hate of mine, is ruckman should never run with the ball, especially trying to shrug off a tackle. What Zach Smith did at one point during the game was woeful, and he shouldn't have known better to get rid of the ball. But he's always had that tendency to try to take a bit too much on and do a bit more because he's always been that athletic style ruckman. And I just remember watching him in his first few games for the Suns back in 2011, how athletic he was and how he was good with that sort of stuff. But maybe age is just catching up with him, and he no longer has the reaction that he used to.
No, he's definitely lost a bit of leg speed. He did. He was pretty quick off the mark, and I do recall when he was first here. And one thing that Geelong liked as well when he ended up going there, they went, we like the athleticism of Zach and his ruck ability. So he's never really quite set the world alight for someone of his ability. And now injuries are mounting up, unfortunately for Zach. And he was always only going to be a VFL and player this year and a backup only if Conroy, in the 1,000-to-1 chance that Matt Conroy, who was probably going to be the number one backup for Jared Witts, of course, if they both went down, and sure enough, they both went down. So that's why Zach's in there now.
And finally, there was probably a few horrible skill mistakes that the players made, and they were the pretty obvious ones that I think everyone gets annoyed with, where you pretty much kick directly to an opposition player who seems to be all by himself. That happened a few times. I can't pinpoint which players did it. It was late on a Saturday night. I was very tired, but it was frustrating to see that sort of skill level happen.
I think you're pretty safe and say that Markov does it at least once a game. What he brings with his speed and ability to break the lines is offset to a certain extent with his lack of kicking ability. He's not bad, but he does turn it over, and he's the first to admit it as well. He's just not a great kick of the ball, which is a shame because he's lightning quick. So maybe get it in his hands, break the lines, and then handball it.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing Saturday night. Every time he got the ball, I thought, I don't know where he's going to go with this. If he kicks it, just handball it. But
like Adam Sard, he's not too dissimilar to Adam Sard, because Sard would just take off, have two bounces, and then Sard isn't a bad kick, but his decision making at times left me very cold. And Markov is a similar sort of player from a really speedy, creative off half back, but we really need him to hit targets, and hopefully with some more continuity, more games under his belt, because once again, he's probably around about the 30 to 40 AFL game mark. So if he wants to play 100 games of AFL footy, his kicking's got to improve, because the speed thing won't just cut it alone, particularly with the squad that the Suns have got together. When you consider the likes of Benny Ainsworth and Will Brodie, Darcy McPherson, Josh Corbett, Jack Bowes, Matt Rowell, Sam Day, Jared Witts, Connor Butterick, they're pretty close. 80% of those guys are walk-up starts in the first 22. So there's 7 or 8 players that come straight in, who's 7 or 8 to go out, and it's going to be someone who turns the ball over, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is. So moving on, let's talk about where we're at the midway point of the season. The Gold Coast Suns have 4 wins, 7 losses, a percentage of 92%, and they're currently sitting 14th on the AFL ladder. Yes, 14th. How do you think we've gone? Because I think we were all frustrated early in the season when we dropped games to Adelaide and Carlton that we thought were very winnable.
Yes.
But since then, with the exception of the show out to the Brisbane game, which in all honesty we probably weren't that bullish to win anyway.
No.
Maybe the St Kilda game. I think we've pretty much met expectations since those first couple of games that we weren't able to win.
Yeah, we've been so close. It's been an almost season, and I'm sure a few teams around the AFL and listeners will go, "Oh yeah, you win some, you lose some. You lose some close games, you win some close games." But the Suns were absolutely in it up to their eyeballs in round 1 in Perth against the West Coast Eagles, and the West Coast blew that game out in the last 5 minutes, I think, with the last 3 goals of the game, and they kicked the first 3 goals in the first 3 minutes, and in between that, the Suns dominated 80%, 85% of that game in round 1, and I thought, oh, look out. If we won that game, it would have been a very different story. There would have been another level of confidence that the guys would have had, and away he goes. It's so important to bank those early wins. So losing that game to Adelaide after a flyer of a start in the first quarter against them over there, and Adelaide are going to be an also-ran, unfortunately, this year. They've had a few good wins. They've improved on last year, but they'll be bottom 6. Winning that over there in Adelaide would have again been a fantastic away win. But what's hurt more than anything are the 2 home slogs against Carlton and St Kilda, where you would have banked those wins, particularly when you look at, Carlton are again going to be mid lower table. St Kilda haven't lived up to expectations this year, and both of those games are extremely winnable. They're at home. They're the games that you just need to win. And 4 and 7 isn't bad, but 5 and 6 gives you certainly a sniff of final, a bigger sniff of finals. Not to say 4 and 7 we're out of it, but we'd need a lot to go our way, particularly with the likes of Melbourne and Richmond and Essendon to come, who are all in reasonable form. 4 and 7's a long way back to try and have a sniff of finals, but 5 and 6, but ideally 6 and 5. If we're 6 and 5 after 11, and we bank those 2 wins against Carlton and St Kilda, I think anything could have happened from there. But unfortunately, just weren't good enough on the night. We missed those 2 games. This in 12 months' time, that's not going to happen. It would be a travesty if those sorts of games go against us in 12 months with the talent that we've got, the time that they've had together now, the excuses, and hopefully the second half of the season. Anything can happen in the second half of the season as well. We've obviously COVID's rearing its head again, unfortunately, and games can be played anywhere. I think the Suns go pretty well away from home. You talked about the West Coast. We mentioned the West Coast and the Adelaide games away from home. We went close to winning those. And when you think about it, 11 games, there's only 2 games where it's been horrific against the Western Bulldogs and the Brisbane Lions. But honestly, I would be surprised if at least one of those teams don't make the grand final this year. The Brisbane Lions look like men versus boys. They're ready. They're going to make the top 4. Western Bulldogs on their day have blown teams away, and the second half against the Western Bulldogs was one of our best halves of the season. So, despite getting blown away in the first half, and obviously with Melbourne on top of the ladder, they're obviously a clear top 3 at the moment, and 2 of them have got hold of us. But the other 9 games we've been in absolutely up to our eyeballs.
Yeah, we have. We do have a pretty tough run home, the Suns. I've just been looking over the ladder predictor, and I mean we've got an incredibly difficult stretch of games later in the year, starting with the Western Bulldogs, followed up with Melbourne, and then Brisbane. So 3 games against likely the top 3 sides in the competition in 3 consecutive weeks. That's going to be brutal. We also have games against Port Adelaide, Richmond, GWS, Carlton and Essendon. So 6 games there against sides that are all sort of pushing for that 8 in around the same sort of position we are. Some a bit more skillful than us, and others around the mark. And then we've only got 1 game against sides in the bottom 4 on the ladder, and that's against North Melbourne in a few weeks. So very tough. I think
down in Tassie too, and North Melbourne have got a fantastic record down there. So that won't be easy either.
Which is a shame, because I've done the breakdown of our average winning and losing margins over the season so far. And against bottom 4 sides, we had 3 wins and 1 loss with an average winning margin of 40 points. Against sides around the mark as us, we've had 1 win and 3 losses with an average losing margin of 15 points. And then against sides in the top 4, we've had 3 losses with an average losing margin of 56 points. So obviously that 56 points is exaggerated because of the thrashings we got from the Bulldogs and Brisbane. But who's to say that's not going to happen again, because those sides are seriously talented. And when you add Melbourne into that as well, and having to play those 3 teams in 3 consecutive weeks, that could be very demoralising for the Suns.
It could be, and imagine if on the flip side, if we won one of them, or we won the first of those 3, how it could be. Oh, hang on a minute. Hopefully they take us lightly, and we come out and surprise them and jump them early. The Brisbane Lions definitely have the wood on us. A couple of practice matches against them at the start of the year, we jumped out of the blocks I remember in one of the games, and Brisbane banged on 10 in a row. I think they kicked 13 or 14 in a row against us. They are seriously good, the Brisbane Lions. And the Bulldogs and Melbourne on their day, they're obviously in the top couple and can beat anybody as well. So no doubt those 3 games, those 3 weeks will be extremely tough, but they've got to take some serious learning. They've got to give themselves a chance, and they have a red hot crack at it and take some learnings. Worst case scenario, if they do happen to drop those 3 games, take some learnings out of it and go into next year knowing that we're a bigger chance to knock them off next year than probably what we are this year. But there are a number of building blocks that are looking fantastic. There's some really good signs. We just need more consistency and obviously less injuries to the key players, because who would have thought Witts, Conroy and Day we would have lost in the first couple of weeks on the back of Rowell and Butterick. I mean, they're 5 extremely important players to the structure of the team, or 4, and then Matt Conroy as a developing young ruckman. We look at that. All teams have injuries, though. I mean, Treloar and Dunkley are huge outs for the Dogs at the moment. Lockie Neal's been out, Cam Rayner for the Lions. So all clubs are going to go through it. But the value and the importance of no doubt Witts, Rowell and Day in particular, Day and Witts being 2 of the most experienced players in the team and 2 of the tallest in the team, we do look a bit short and a bit light on in the height stakes, particularly when we played Brisbane a few weeks ago.
Yeah. So where do you think the Suns are going to finish on the ladder? Your predictions? Are they going to get 10 wins? They're going to finish between 10th and 12th with maybe 8 to 10 wins?
I think 8 to 10 wins. Yeah, I reckon. Let's go for 9. Let's jag 9 wins. I'll go out and be specific, Shane, and say 9 wins for the season. We'll finish in around about 11th or 12th position with 9 wins, depending what happens around us, and they'll rue those West Coast, Adelaide, Carlton, St Kilda opportunities in the first 6 or 7 rounds of the season, because all of them were very winnable, and you could easily beat 11, 12, 13 wins on the back of that if they were to get 9. So finishing the last 11 games 5 and 6 would be a fantastic effort, because it is a very tough draw that they do have. They are playing a lot of top 8 teams and will need to bring their best. And hopefully with Jack Bowes and Matty Rowell and Sam Day back in the next couple of weeks, don't expect them, certainly Rowell and Day, after longer term injuries, don't expect them to set the world on fire in the first couple of games, but they'll really help our structure and the desperation around the team, because I'm struggling to find who's going to miss out. I mean, Caleb Graham's been very good, and he's missed out on the weekend. Josh Corbett had a bit of a quiet game and probably lost his spot on the back of that, but prior to that he'd been very competitive. Darcy McPherson, Will Brodie, Ben Ainsworth, Braden Fiorini. I mean, there's some very good talent there. They just haven't been able to get in the team with the structure and the way they're playing. So there is a lot of depth, which there's a lot of young depth, a lot of young talent across the top 28 players at the club, which is fantastic. So I'm bullish. I'm very bullish on them, and I guarantee you, if they were sitting here 6 and 5, we'd be having a different conversation, talking about can we jag another 5 wins and hold on to a good percentage and maybe sneak 11 wins and maybe sneak into 8th. You don't want them to do that and get smashed in the first final, like 5th versus 8th. They come up against a Port Adelaide in Adelaide, for argument's sake, and get done by 10 goals, and then it can hurt them for the following season. I'd rather them finish on a high, winning half of their games and another 4 or 5 games in the latter half of the season, finish in a competitive position, 12th, 11th on the ladder somewhere, and be ready from round 1 and just bank those wins and bank 3 or 4 early wins in the first 5 or 6 rounds and set the season up. That's what they need to do, and they didn't do it this year. They had the chance and they missed it.
Yeah, so I'd be thinking something similar for the Gold Coast Suns. The highest they've ever finished on the ladder is 14th, and that was with 8 wins. So if the Suns can achieve that or more, I'm going to be very happy with that, especially considering the loss of Witts, Day, Rowell for all or most of the 2021 season. So yeah, if we can keep our I'm having a mind fart. If we can keep our eyes on what is actually in front of us with the reality of the tough run home, the Gold Coast Suns should be able to snag a few wins, but we shouldn't expect them to be pushing for finals. I think the injuries have just hurt us too much.
We needed to be 100% fit to try and jag 12 wins this season. We would have had to be at our absolute best. Pinch games like the West Coast Adelaide game away from home, pinch one or both of those and have everyone fully fit, and we might have snuck into 7th or 8th. That would have been best case scenario, because the top 6 or 7 teams are still ahead of us. But when it clicks, and it's starting to, once it clicks each and every week, like it has really started to for the Brisbane Lions the last 2.5 seasons, it'll be self-perpetuating, the perpetual motion that will just carry through the group, where they have an expectation to win every week, not an expectation to compete and a deep down hope that we might jag a win. They'll have an expectation to win every week. Brisbane Lions go out on the road or play at the Gabba, they have an expectation to win every game. Melbourne are in that headspace at the moment. And last year, what did they finish? They're bottom 4. So, for the first half of the season, they're bottom 4. They won a few games in the second half of the season and improved. Prior to that, they finished top 4 the year before. So it can really turn very, very quickly. And you can get on a roll, and you can meet teams on an off day. They might meet a Brisbane or a Melbourne or a Bulldogs, or a couple of them on an off day, and jag a win. And then momentum builds, and they win the next couple in a row, and all of a sudden everyone's having a different conversation. So footy's a funny game, and I'm not prepared to write the season off yet, Shane. I don't think they'll make the 8. I don't think they'll probably won't finish top 10, but I'm not willing to write the season off yet, because funnier things have happened, and they could quite easily go over and knock over Fremantle, and then come here and knock over Port Adelaide at home, and all of a sudden we're 6 and 7, and it's a very different headspace going into a tough run of games.
Yeah, things like that could happen. Tomorrow night, the mid-season draft is on. We've only got 2 minutes left, so I'm just going to quickly run over this, and then we'll end up the show, Jason.
Sure.
The Suns were keen on selecting Michael Knoll, the Norwood ruckman, averaging 31 hitouts, former Sydney player. He's failed a medical test with his knee injury he suffered playing for Sydney, so he seems to be ruled out now. And the Suns will have 2 available slots and will likely select between Wiley Buzzer, the Werribee forward ruck who played 9 games for Port and Geelong, Jackson Callow, a Norwood key forward, 18-year-old young gun who is also being eyed off by Collingwood, who unfortunately have a selection before us, Ash Johnson, Sturt, player for Sturt in the Sandful, 24-year-old key forward, who's also the cousin of Jai Farah.
That'd be handy.
He's also being targeted by Collingwood. I think they should target Cody Rack, a key defender from the Western Jets. He made Toomey's draft team of the week, but I haven't heard anything linking the Suns to him yet. And the other one is a young ruckman from Collingwood, Collingwood's VFL side, Ned Moyle. So 210 centimetres tall there. There's also been a couple of other players linked. A ruckman for Carlton's VFL side, the 205 centimetre Alex Murkov. And it's going to be interesting to see who the Gold Coast Suns select, as it seems to all be dependent on Collingwood or Hawthorn and who they take. But the Suns will have 2 selections. And the one I'm forgetting is apparently Fraser Thurlow is being closely looked at by the Suns and they could select him with their last pick if they don't select a ruckman with their first pick in the draft tomorrow night. That's all we have time for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, and go Suns.
Thanks, Shane.